Well, when I say natural resource mapping, what I'm referring to is just the mapping of the resources in our environment. And it can be land use mapping, it can be extractive mapping and looking for oil and minerals and things like that. But what we primarily are involved in is mapping land use change analysis, doing some land use change mapping. We do an invasive species mapping, things like purple loosestrife, and on the Hudson we're also doing submerged aquatic vegetation mapping. So when I say natural resource mapping, I'm referring to those types of things as opposed to minerals or extractives.
In this environment, we have the opportunity to use these technology tools to do some applied research, but then we get to marry it with doing education work and sharing the technology, the skills, the knowledge, the information about how do you learn about your environment. We get to share that with a variety of audiences. Being part of the land grant mission, it's our job to share that information with anyone in New York State that needs it.
And also, working for an institution like Cornell, it doesn't get boring. Every year or two, things are new. There's new opportunities open up. You can go and follow what is of interest and pursue it. So that's the advantage, I think, of working at an institution like Cornell as opposed to out in the private sector, where pretty much what you did the last 5 years is what you're going to be doing for the next 5. It's not the case at all. Well, I guess what I'm looking at when we do research, we're looking at different ways of preparing data sets or maps that will show the information that we need to show and intersect those data layers that we're interested in and trying to come up with some new analysis. Whether it be the analysis being what is impacting this particular resource. Perhaps it's the submerged aquatic vegetation that I mentioned, mapping in the Hudson. What might be causing that to either grow in this particular location or not grow in that location, things like that. So we're looking at how we can develop these data sets and how we can manipulate them to try and get an answer. And then how can we impart that knowledge, how can we impart that process out to the counties or the municipalities or the individuals.
When we did the submerged aquatic, when we started doing the submerged aquatic vegetation project, it was to provide some baseline information because the scientists were interested in knowing where are the plants in the Hudson River and to what extent are they growing from the federal dam at Troy down to Yonkers. 125 miles. It's a lot of area and a lot of people living within proximity of the river. Once we had our inventory, the number of people from different communities that were interested in the data was fascinating to me. It wasn't just the scientists. It was Department of Environmental Conservation managers who are responsible for writing permits. It was non-governmental organizations that do conservation work. It was the local managers, the local municipality officials. It was teachers, and it was students. Everyone had an interest in what was happening in their river, and this helped. The research that we were doing was providing, we now had a product that was like a vehicle for stewardship. And now these plants, which are very beneficial to the river, are more protected now because of the research that we did and the education process back and forth between these other audiences and the scientists.
Having an extension appointment means essentially that we answer more to the citizens of New York State. It's our job to get the information that Cornell is developing, the research information and things like that, and get it out to where they can use it.
And the other way too is to find out what the needs are out in the community and bring those concerns back to the university to inform the research that goes on here.
We do that on a personal level just by working with the people in the counties and municipalities and the NGOs and things like that. That's part of what our applied research does. We take some of the information that we've gotten from Cornell. We see a need in the community being anywhere in New York State, and we write proposals, we seek funding, and we apply what we have learned. And then in that process, because we are extension, all of our applied research has to include an educational component. So that educational component sometimes is in the form of workshops, lectures, things like that. Other times it's in the form of involving the citizens themselves in collecting the data and doing citizen science type of things, such as with the SAV mapping, volunteer mapping in the Hudson. So it can address any number of those things.
Yeah, the volunteer monitoring program was a wonderful offshoot of this mapping project. There were volunteer kayakers who did cleanup on the river, and they heard about our project and they wanted to know if they could help. And from that initial inquiry, we've now developed a monitoring program. It's been in place for 5 years now, where volunteer kayakers go out on the river. They set out transects on the surface of the water to make observations about the plants, and they return that data to us to inform our mapping process.
Getting the volunteers involved just expands the interest tremendously on the river, because they have their friends, they get other volunteers involved into it. It helps build a base of support for continuing the effort to preserve the SAV beds and things like that on the river. And it also helps to build a political base of support for any actions that the DEC or others might want to pursue in protecting it.
And who cares? They care. They're the ones who came to us. It's their river, and they wanted to have a say in helping. They wanted to play a role in helping preserve values that they held highly. This particular project was really interesting because it wasn't controversial. There wasn't an issue other than the scientists felt they needed to know more about the resource in order to understand the dynamics of the whole river. So it wasn't a polarizing question that was on a ballot measure. There wasn't a new industry moving in, or there wasn't a concern that invasive species were destroying this resource. And so we were able to help put this body of objective knowledge out there for anyone to use. And as I said, there were a lot of audiences that were interested in it. And that's the best. That's the best scenario. It's a little harder when there's a controversial question on the table and you want to bring objective information to bear, and then people start wrangling over the interpretation of the data. It's harder then.
Yeah.